Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric and a continuing series Castlevania Chronicles, where I review every single mainline Castlevania game ever made in a retrospective fashion. And today we're taking a look at Castlevania Dracula X on the Super Nintendo. And this is a game that most people seem to think isn't that great, but we're going to examine it in slightly of a different way. Right off the top, I will just get it out of the way. This is a pseudo remake of Rondo of Blood for the PC Engine. If you're wondering which of the two games is better, Rondo wins 10 out of 10 times. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like, subscribe, and that notification bell definitely helps us out. If you feel so inclined and want to support our Patreon, there's a link down below as well. Trevor Belmont's a member, are you? But all things aside, this game is not a bad game. The issue is it always gets compared to Rondo of Blood, and that's like comparing Michael Jordan to a player that you've never heard of before that played 3 seasons in the NBA. They were still good enough to get there, they're just not all-star Hall of Fame level, and neither is this game if you compare it next to Rondo of Blood. But if we actually look at Dracula X as a standalone game and start ignoring the fact that it is just a pseudo remake, you start to realize that this game is actually quite good. It is not the A tier of Castlevania games, it's a solid B+ effort. Visually, I think it is stunning, with those little bit of Mode 7 graphics for the flames in the background. When this game first came out, it got pretty much knocked for having graphics that were inferior to Super Castlevania 4, and I'm really not sure how that happened, because of the two games on offer for the Super Nintendo as far as Dracula is concerned, I think Dracula X looks much better and more impressive than Castlevania 4. I get the Castlevania 4 used all of those interesting Mode 7 effects for the rotation where this game does not, but honestly I think those hold up much worse than this pure 2D pixel art that you guys are seeing right here. Now that we're on to the first stage, let's go right to the second. There's nothing wrong with Dracula X. It is a quite competent Castlevania game with great music, great art style, classic sprites, and it really does have the look and feel of a Castlevania game you want to play, compared to something like Bloodlines, which I think is an excellent game, but has never quite looked or felt like a Castlevania game to me. Just keep always moving forward in this game. Stopping is death in certain spots. But this has all the classic Castlevania from the 16-bit era before it went over to the Metroidvania, and I really do love that about it. A lot of the other complaints are the color palette. I understand that for Dracula's castle here, this looks bright and cheery and airy, but I love the colors that they're going with, these regal blues and those kind of, goldenrod yellows. They look really nice on screen together, and I for one think the color palette, while definitely garish, works in a positive way, not a negative way. These purples here, they're all the color of royalty. There were certain colors that would denote royalty and that status back in the day, and this game uses a lot of them. I would assume that is intentional, but I'm not sure. But if Dracula is the king of darkness, then why does he not get regal colors? Even something underground where you get these mossy greens up against those stone colors. I think it looks impeccably done. It's kind of a bummer that people don't think this game looks good, because that's a complaint I disagree with. Now, some things don't work right, like the double jump here, the backflip. It's pretty much almost a guaranteed death unless you use it perfectly, and some jumps can be downright cruel. This platform is going to spin, and if you time it just right, you can hit the Medusa head and get past the bone pillars, but it's really trying to just throw you back down. This game is unforgiving, and in some instances the level layout feels slightly like it could have been done better. Here's a really good example of that coming up here. I'm on this platform, a merman's going to jump up, and he's going to knock me back. And if you don't know that you need to stand slightly further back on that platform to get that whip swing in, that area is probably going to drive you nuts. And this game does, on occasion, give you some deaths that feel absolutely unfair. But what the game has successfully done is remade those Red Book audio tracks from Rondo of Blood and put them in a Dracula X with the Super Nintendo sound hardware. So go ahead and listen for like 30-45 seconds, and I will be right back, but enjoy. It's got all that nice synth sound that the Super Nintendo does so well. I totally enjoy the soundtrack. I get that in spots the original tracks from Rondo of Blood are going to sound better because they had a lot more bitrate and content, just given the fact that they were spooling off the CD. But but I think one of the best accomplishments is just that they were able to get the soundtrack sounding so good. And my one biggest thumbs up about Dracula X is that the Flea Man corridor, something that pretty much every single Castlevania game throws at you, feels the most fair out of any standard 2D Castlevania game I've ever played. Normally the Flea Man corridor just wants to kill you and make you start over from scratch. This one here, on my first go through and pretty much every time, feels really fair. So this game's a dichotomy. In some spots it feels like it's one of the more fair Castlevania games, and in other spots it feels like it really just wants you to die over and over again. It throws everything in the kitchen sink at you, but at this point in time, people have been playing Castlevania for a long time, so there's nothing wrong with some extra challenge. Even these areas here where the floor crumbles, they can be a little bit of pain in the butt, but if you just kind of pay attention to the cadence, understand how those crows are flying, you can start to line them up so you can get hits here and knock them both out at the same time. Dracula X is all about pacing and moving around the screen and making sure you're in the right place at the right time. But there are some, I don't know if they're bugs or just slight flaws. You saw that I got hit there. Was that my fault or was that the game being cheap? Let's slow it down and see what's going on. And you will see right here, that sword got absolutely nowhere near me. That was a full like 10-20 pixels away from me. So the game definitely has a little bit of jank that we can't deny. But everything else that's here is still so much fun, and it is kind of unfair that this game constantly gets compared to Rondo of Blood, but honestly if it's a pseudo remake, that's what's going to happen. And the reason that this is not just Rondo of Blood completely one-to-one remade for the Super Nintendo is because NEC and Hudson Sauce had an exclusive agreement with Konami to make sure that Rondo of Blood only stayed on that console. So the best Konami could have done to try to bring it to the Super Nintendo was to remake it with some inspiration from that game. I think the better thing to have done would have been to make another new, completely original Castlevania game, but honestly I certainly wouldn't give this game up if there was no other alternative. And I do love this bone dragon pillar here, when you can see Dracula's tower in the background through those windows. It's got some really nice parallax scrolling going on as well. And it's always a good time when you get a bone dragon pillar, if you know what I mean. Wink wink nod nod. But I love the verticality nature of this game as well. You're constantly going up and down. You're not just side-scrolling left and right. So that's a lot of benefit. And I'd be curious if you know where this section is from Rondo of Blood, because some things seem very obvious and some seem completely random and not related to that game at all. But the soundtrack is still amazing, so go ahead and take in another track for 30 seconds and I'll be back and we'll close out the video on Dracula X. Now what this game does feature that came over from Rondo of Blood is different paths throughout the game. There's alternate levels and secret exits that you can find. If you've never played this game before, I'm not going to show you where they are because I want you to discover them on yourselves. And I feel like if there's one game in this series that people are going to say they've never played before, it's probably going to be Dracula X right here, because I'm sure most of you have played Rondo of Blood, but you maybe didn't play this one because you heard on the internet that it's not good whatsoever. And that just isn't true, and that's why I wanted to take a look at this video and not so much compare it to Rondo of Blood, but to talk about it on its own merits, because when you leave Rondo out, this game starts getting much, much better. And I love seeing all the classic enemies here as well, and there's that hidden door on the right. I wonder where that goes. If you've never played, you'll have to take a look and see. And I died there. This game is mean. It's going to kill you. You're going to have to memorize enemy patterns. You're going to have to memorize your movement throughout the game. And I would say that jumping definitely plays a large mechanic in this because there are so many different fall deaths that you can take. But I particularly love this background. It almost feels like an Acropolis or Atlantis under the sea. It's just so much fun to look at. There's a nice depth in the image. Those pillared buildings in the background really do feel like they're receding off into the distance, even when we're going up on these little floating platforms here. And that's why this game is really good. It is classic 2D Castlevania action. It is hard. It is demanding of your time and attention. You need to be playing basically perfectly the entire time you're playing this game, or else you're not going to be able to see the ending. And even if you're playing perfectly, you might still still not be able to beat the game. And that one jump I missed right there was a cheap death. And if you want to talk about cheap deaths, we got to talk about the Dracula battle, because it takes place in an arena with pits, and I swear this one pillar is bugged, because every single time I jump off it, my character does something completely different. I'm going to try to jump forward normally, and a short jump took a long one. Now I'm going to try to go ahead and take a long jump, and I'm going to push that button in just a moment, and you're going to see what happens. This is probably the worst final Dracula battle in Castlevania. It's not a good way to end. Bye-bye.